Welcome everyone to the 72nd Annual All-America City Awards. My name is Rebecca Trout and I'm the Program Director of the All-America City Awards here at the National Civic League. We're thrilled that you have joined us to celebrate and learn from this year's finalists who represent the very best in American civic engagement. We hope that you'll stay tuned over the coming days to watch their presentation and learn how all of our finalists are enhancing equity and resilience in their communities. Speaking of this year's theme, today's pre-recorded workshop is focusing on local efforts to achieve racial equity. We are joined by our friends at the United Way. First up, we have Mayetta Moon, Director of Health at United Way Worldwide, Ellie Hag, President and CEO of United Way of Racine County, Aiden Sanders, Accelerate Success Program Director, and Rowena Pineda, Director of Community Collaboration and Equity at the United Way of Spokane County. Thank you all for joining us so much. Can't wait to hear your remarks. Mayetta, can you get us started today?
I sure can. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I am Mayetta Moon, the Director of Health at United Way Worldwide. And just bear with me one second. And I'm here to talk about United Way Worldwide's efforts to integrate equity into our community impact work with a specific focus on community engagement. So I'll get started with this by talking about our United Way Worldwide Equity Framework, which we created last year and released to our network, and it is also available publicly as well. So if you are familiar with United Way Worldwide, we have over 1,000 United Ways across the globe. But this work that we're going to discuss today is US focused. We have 3 pillars: education, economic mobility, and health. And we believe that this is important to helping people live their healthiest lives. In the US, we have 3 very bold goals: that 5 million people will get better jobs, 95% of students will graduate high school ready for college and career, and 90% of people will be healthier. You know, we see this as our North Star. However, we know that we cannot adequately reach these goals unless we have an implicit focus on equity. We have to close those gaps in order to, like I mentioned earlier, help people to live their best, healthiest lives. So we created the equity framework, and this document is really to help provide guidance to local United Ways and partners to just help them to start thinking about equity from the community impact perspective. So within this framework, we have an introduction that explains why we are doing this, our shared definition and vision of equity for the network, which I will go over in another slide. And then we have equity levers that we have determined are, what needs to be pushed in communities in order to, really get that jump start on helping their communities, their populations focus more on equity. So this is our equity definition and vision. The equity framework, as well as this equity definition and vision for equity, was created with local United Ways and national partner organizations. We are fortunate enough to have the National Civic League join us in the development of the equity framework and the creation of this definition and vision. And you can read it on the screen, but we felt that it was important, as you can see in the vision, for us to identify that racism is a key issue in structural forms of oppression that have contributed to persistent disparities. And that's something that we at United Way seek to dismantle. And we do that through co-creating solutions with our communities, and that includes partners, donors, corporate partners across the board. We consider that our community, and we want to work together to make sure that we achieve our goal. So as I mentioned, the equity framework focuses on 6 equity levers, that is data, community mobilization and engagement, communications and awareness, policy and advocacy, fundraising, resource allocation and grant making, and local capacity building. And so today I'm just going to go over community mobilization and engagement. Each lever has different sections that can help you to start your equity journey. We ask you to take stock of what's going on in your organization and in your community. We provide potential strategies and actions that you can take in each lever. We encourage you to take action and then track progress across time. So in terms of community engagement and mobilization, a couple of things. We believe that integrating an equity lens into the community engagement work, it creates opportunities for empowerment. It's not something that is led by an organization, by a United Way. It is something that incorporates all voices of the community into inclusive decision making. It allows opportunities to really listen to what people are saying and to incorporate that into the work. We see equity as a process and an outcome. And so this is really a part of the process of incorporating equity into your community's goals. And this also gives people an opportunity to recognize the leadership that currently exists in communities, and to come together around these informal networks that already exist, but giving them an opportunity to be elevated and to be leveraged for the greater good. And if you have community engagement, that will increase the likelihood that the community will buy into whatever it is that you've identified is the issue and the solution. This is not a top-down approach. Community engagement is really about bringing people together around the table to come to these solutions together. And it also improves citizens' knowledge skills around problem solving, so that this is something that they can take and use in other areas of their work, of their life, of their community. And it also ensures that whatever equity efforts that you and your organization has identified as important aligns with what the community actually says is important. And so these are some of the strategies that we've identified. There are definitely others. And within the framework, if you have an opportunity to look at it, it is online. We have strategies where you can accelerate your work, but these are really ways to begin to think about community engagement, in whatever community work you're doing. Assess your organization's history of meaningful community engagement. What have you done, in the past, and are there relationships that you need to build up, to mend, to rectify? Build trust, by cultivating authentic relationships. Map who's already doing what, whatever it is the issue, like I said, that you've identified. Someone else may already be doing it, so there's no need to kind of go in, reinvent the wheel. How can you be asked to that table, so that you can work with them, on that issue. Create diverse opportunities for people. Everyone has different skill sets, and this is a way to bring that out, and to really help people to identify what it is that they're capable of doing, and how they're able to bring that to focus. Act as a convener. So this is more of a kind of like a United Way specific, because we are known as conveners in communities, but that doesn't mean that you in your community, can't also play this role if there isn't someone there doing it already. model equitable convening practices. And, fortunately we have some of my colleagues are going to be talking about that and how they've done that in their communities. Partner with trusted community leaders. Like I said, there are already people in the community who are doing this work, who have the trust, so, how can you bring them on board, or how can you get on board with them to do this important work? And, think about this as a long-term effort. It's not about like this one time in and out. How can you continue these relationships, continue these discussions to inform, your work moving forward? And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Ellie, to share her work.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Ellie Hegg. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Racine County, and I'm going to talk to you about some of our local practices as it relates to race, equity, and inclusion. What I would say before I start my presentation is a couple of things. I would note that for communities and organizations that are still a little bit earlier on in their progress to work towards equity directly, I think that some of the items that I highlight today will help you specifically. So we are going to focus on basically the 101s of how to introduce equity into your community and through your organization's own practices. So for us as an organization, the number one way that we became involved in this work is by completing 2 years of community conversations that were focused on race, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that Maeda said in her presentation was the focus on aligning what your organization is doing with what the community perceives as issues. You don't want to have misalignment. And so that was very important to us. And Racine was identified and continues to be identified as the second worst place in the country for African Americans to live. That is not a title that we want to continue to hold. So for us, focusing on race was a very important aspect of our work moving forward and how we play a role in inequities in our community. So we focused on these conversations for 2 years. We did approximately 26 of them, had about 450 participants. From those practices, we were able to create reports that we then shared with the community and helped us to identify some key areas that we felt we could add some value in our community as it relates to equity. A couple of things that are important is that we tried very hard to be diverse in our engagement through the conversations. They're small kitchen table style discussions, not meant for more than 15 people. And we specifically focused on many different demographics, whether that's socioeconomic, race, religion, gender, age, all of anything that you can imagine. We try to focus on different populations and engage individuals to say, what do you think our biggest challenges are locally as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where do you see that we can make change? What are some solutions, and really listening to our community? And it was very helpful. It helped us, just like Maeda said, building trust in our community with individuals that maybe historically we haven't been able to build trust with in the past. As we turned out to the community and we learned what they felt were the biggest issues, we suddenly realized that there was an important factor that we needed to work on, and that is our own internal practices. So although focusing externally and how to invest and develop and support our community through equity is important, it's also important to get your own house in order. And so one of the first things that we did after we were done with REI community conversations was create a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee of our own internal staff. This is a great idea. Any organization can do it. I would tell you a couple of things. You'll see the pictures of the individuals from our committee on the screen. And what we do is we engage our entire organization around this. So we have representation from every level and every department. So we have somebody that might be an administrative assistant all the way up to someone on senior leadership that participate on the committee. They are entrusted in doing a vast amount of different things. Most importantly, it's polling our staff to understand where we can provide training and help both professional and personal growth as it relates to equity. And so what we found is that it wasn't just a conversation around race that needed to happen. There were many different trainings that our staff were interested in, and they really yearn for the opportunity to grow in. And that includes things like neurodiversity or LGBTQ training. So those are all very important to us, and we've provided those trainings to our staff. In addition to that, they oversee our diversity and inclusion statements on our website. They update it regularly. We look at having a 3-year strategic plan that's focused on our staff and development on how we can focus on our policies and procedures and other key training that we can have over the next 3 years. Now, I think that this is important because those of us that are coming from communities that are more entry level as it relates to equity and inclusion, the fundamental of that is education. You need to educate individuals before they can really grow in that subject matter. So for those of us that have had the opportunity to participate in many different maybe community trainings or community groups that have allowed us to become educated on the subject matter, you become more aware and more sensitive and more open. And I think that's very important to us and our staff. So we're proud of the work that we've done in that area with our staff and our own internal practices. Part of the community conversations that we held, there were a couple of key practices that we took away that we turned outward to the community to engage. One was our One Racine event that was a community-wide event that was celebrating diversity among our community. And we held that was brought in over 1,000 individuals to a community area. And then the other element of that was an equity pledge, a diversity and equity pledge. And one thing that happens is when you take that pledge, you're automatically signed up for our DEI newsletter. So once again, Basics 101 is exposure, education, trying to engage. So we do a quarterly newsletter that goes out to our community, not just those that participated in the equity pledge and inclusion pledge. It goes out to basically anybody that's interested. So they can sign up via our website, Declaration of Inclusion, or participating in a groundwater training that we offer to the community as well. This is a great way just to start with very simple readings, videos, and exposure to more knowledge so that people can become more aware and be more comfortable having the conversation around equity and inclusion. From that, we participated in a 21-week equity challenge. Now, this is a statewide initiative of all United Ways, but our United Way is a host United Way. What that means is that we have created our own content and connected individuals to community organizations, resources, and opportunities to engage at a local level, rather than it just being a statewide initiative and having statewide data or information out there. Now, this initiative is mirrored after Mrs. Irving and Dr. Moore. Both are from Wisconsin, and they created a 21-day challenge, which was really designed to engage and teach through a driven process of repeated information. We stretch it out over 21 weeks. And what I love about this is that it provides an opportunity for people to listen, to read, and to act. So it's as simple as having videos that have a different range of timelines, 3-minute video, 12-minute video, 30-minute video, whatever you have time for that day. Readings, 3-minute reading, 7-minute reading, 20-minute reading, whatever you have time for that day. It allows the viewer to kind of identify things that they want to learn about in the time allotment that they have to learn about it, because you have to meet people where they want to be met, which is very important. We've seen some great successes with this initiative. We are about 3/4 of the way through it, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of people sign up for it. And anybody that's interested in signing up can sign up for it throughout the entire 21 weeks. And then they have access to the prior week's focuses and newsletters themselves. We're very proud of that. These are just a few of the examples of how we have been able to engage the community around race, equity, and inclusion. It's a small fraction of what we're doing, but what I would say is that it's a very important part of introducing your community and your organization to education to get people on board to start understand the importance of us focusing on equity. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my counterparts at Spokane.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Maida. Unmute, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hi, everyone. I'm Rowena Pineda. I am the Director of Community Collaborations and Equity at Spokane County United Way, and I am joined today by Aidan Sanders, who is the Program Director of Accelerate Success. And what I've appreciated with Maida's and Ali's presentation is that Maida was able to bring the United Way worldwide view and goals of our work on equity. And then Ali is really focused on some of the internal work that they've been doing in Racine County. What we're going to talk about today is a program called Accelerate Success, which is a project of Spokane County United Way that is outward facing. So it's really the external work that we've been doing around equity. You know, it always helps when you're, if your slide wants to move, which is not cooperating at the moment. There we go. We just wanted to share with you a little bit about how Accelerate Success got started. So I will do that. And then Aidan will pick it up with what is Accelerate Success doing now. So Accelerate Success is an integral part of Spokane County United Way's journey towards racial equity. And it started with this 2012 report called Odds Against Tomorrow, Health Inequities in Spokane County, that was done by the Spokane Regional Health District. And this report for the first time in the county provided data on how health inequities impact different communities. The report looked at how inequities in education, household income, race, ethnicity, and place neighborhoods contribute to disparities in health outcomes. For United Way, it gave us the data that we needed to look at, especially in the priority areas of education, about how education connects to health directly. And so with that, we started this project called Accelerate Success. And Accelerate Success was the cradle to career collective impact effort. And our goal is to address, of course, different facets of cradle to career: early learning, school age, and post-secondary education. One of the measures that we looked at was one of the things we looked at was the achievement, and then later the opportunity gap. And one of the measures that we looked at was graduation rates. And over time, what we've seen in Spokane County is that graduation rate has increased from a low of 65% to currently closer to 85%. But what we did see in that data is that even though there's this great increase, students of color are still graduating at a much lower rate than their white counterparts. So for example, for our American Indian and Alaska Native, the graduation rate is still hovering at about 71%. And for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, the graduation rate is hovering at about 64%, versus whites, which are hovering at about 88%. So we know that there's work that needs to be done. And this is where it's really important to have the disaggregated data when we're looking at work on equity. We also, in this time period since we started Accelerate Success, The goal of Accelerate Success was to change systems, right? It's to change education systems so that we could increase graduation rates and address that equitably. But we also realized during this period that to achieve racial equity, we recognize that we also need to do the work at the personal level. The two go hand in hand. So starting in November of 2018, the Accelerate Success team prioritized equity and anti-racist learning and set out to create a space for the Spokane community to come together to struggle, learn, unlearn, and build our individual and collective capacity to move closer to our equity aspirations. Only this way will we be able to truly impact the systems that are impacting our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aidan.
Thanks, Rowena. So today we've really focused in on 3 core strategies for anti-racist learning and promoting racial equity. We host an annual community learning event, trainings led by impacted community members and racial affinity groups. And with everything that we do, from trainings to partnership to large-scale events, we prioritize building relationships and community. Next slide, please. In 2018, we kicked off our new missional focus with an event featuring a local BIPOC panel, as well as education for white people on the damaging force of white fragility. Our speaker that year was best-selling author Robin DiAngelo. Accelerate Success staff and leadership struggled with whether this was the best place to start, but ultimately our experience in community conversations about race and racism told us that white people in Spokane were not ready to listen to BIPOC folk tell them they were racist. They needed to hear it first from a white person. The conversation, the theme was white fragility, and the panel conversation with local Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders was systemic racism, education equity, and systems change. Next slide, please. Our annual event in 2019 featured teaching by Ijeoma Oluo, bestselling author of So You Want to Talk About Race, as well as a local multi-generational BIPOC panel conversation on education and race. In addition to the speaker and panel, we offered reflection activities during the event to connect group learning to the self. For the opening, participants were asked to list 5 leaders, past or present, of various identities. For example, Asian American leaders, African American leaders, LGBTQ+ leaders, etc., and to discuss with the people they sat with. The purpose was to facilitate conversation on representation, and the activity also helped us notice groups of people who are and are not recognized as part of mainstream history, and as a result become harder to remember. There were great conversations about identity, the whitewashing of history, and its impact on memory, both individual and collective. Our MC for the event was local Indigenous leader and changemaker Tara Ramos, who asked the question, why aren't we funding BIPOC organizations? And she named specific racist funding dynamics in Spokane. Everyone was uncomfortable in that room. And sitting in this discomfort in 2019 primed folks to have a different kind of conversations around race, grant making, and donations. That's not the only factor in what we're seeing right now, but people started to think and to have more conversations around how to do funding differently. And starting in 2020, we're starting to see more openness to funding BIPOC-led organizations. Next slide. We prioritize hiring, promoting, and connecting local trainers to our growing cohort of community learners and their home organizations. Based on what our participants have been telling us, we've been wanting to go beyond race and began holding space for content experts to grow our equity skills in areas of implicit bias, cultural competency, safer spaces for LGBTQ+ people, and intersectionality. Additionally, we support the care and development of trainer capacity in the Spokane area, including creating readily available training stock pertaining to equity and fostering space for trainer collaboration and healing. Next slide.
Great. So we started caucusing in 2019 because we recognize that each time we hosted trainings or convenings on how racism operates, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities have been harmed. So we have a BIPOC affinity space and a male-identified BIPOC affinity group. These are spaces that allows Black, Indigenous, and people of color to hold each other in solidarity during difficult times. In this space, we are allowed to grieve, to be angry, to experience joy, and to be heard. In this space, we also address internalized and horizontal oppression. The space is complemented by a white accountability space where white people explicitly and intentionally work on developing understanding of whiteness in a space where their shared learning and unlearning will not burden or harm BIPOC people. Accelerate Success views affinity groups and caucusing as a proactive anti-racism and anti-oppression tool that reduces harm to BIPOC individuals, promotes healing, decenters whiteness and its toxic effects, and centers BIPOC people. We also, so right now we are in the process of starting an Asian American and Pacific Islander affinity space that's in progress. And we also have a BIPOC healing space where we bring together BIPOC trainers to come together in a space so that we can heal, knowing that when we are doing the training, that the impact on us is much different than to our white counterparts. So with that, that is a quick snapshot of the work that we do with Accelerate Success. And in the end, really the goal of Accelerate Success is to center Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise and experience with trying to increase racial equity in your communities. We have a few minutes, and I just wanted to ask each of you just a couple of questions. Maida, this one is for you. One of the strategies that you listed was to build trust and authentic relationships. And I'm wondering if you could give us, some best practices, tips of communities that who have been able to do that, and specifically with communities who have been, historically marginalized and have very little reason to trust. Maybe it's the local government, maybe it is even the local United Way. But how are communities supposed to build up that trust when it has been broken down over, many decades in some situations?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think that we point to United Way of Racine County many times in terms of like how they've been able to build trust by bringing people around the table. I don't want to say that they lost trust. That's not my point, but just in terms of like a best practice of how a local United Way has done it. That's something that we highlight often. And I think best practice is just looking to the trusted leaders and establishing authentic relationships with them first, and listening. Don't go in there with an agenda. Just listen, be present, and be there for them. Because if you are an organization like a United Way that has a large footprint in many communities, and sometimes may have been a part of certain types of grant making that may not have benefited people who are marginalized, it's important to step back and to listen to what the people have to say.
Great, thank you so much for that. And Ellie, this next question is for you. While the issues of systemic racism are certainly not new, in the last year or so, there have been events that have just really brought them front of mind into society. And it's left a lot of people looking for a silver bullet to kind of fix everything, right? And your approach is, Racine County's approach is one that is much more longer term, with a 2-year conversation series and a 21-week challenge. what would you say to people who about the importance of a more long-term strategy such as this, about what can be gained over, what seems like a daunting 2-year process, and how those conversations end up being more productive?
I think that you can't affect systemic issues without time. So there's no silver bullet. It's layered. That's why we haven't solved it yet. So you need to go at it step by step, be strategic, be thoughtful. It is important to gain trust with your community. And if you don't have that trust, it takes time to build it. And if you push to have it too quickly, it's inauthentic. And then it doesn't mean anything. So I think if you want to do something right, you need to be thoughtful about it. And sometimes that takes time. And, for us, it's been a huge benefit because we now are transitioning to the external process. We've been able to create $1 million equity innovation fund that we're going to create and will support communities of color. And that is very important to us because we've gone through the process of being thoughtful about that. So you can naturally move step to step and it'll be done right.
Absolutely. Feels like you need to kind of build up that culture of listening, that culture of respect before you can actually begin doing the external work.
Well, and I think a big part of it too, and just to be clear, is that getting people that have the power to make decisions to a point where they want to talk about it and are ready to create change. That takes time too. It's not something that'll just happen overnight. So.
And I'd like to just follow up on what Ellie said, just going back to the building trust. Getting your house in order is very important, right? In terms of demonstrating to the community that this is something that is important to you and your organization. So if you focus on your internal DE&I efforts, then that is, that shows the people that you're working with that this is so important, that you went internal to make sure that the work that you're doing externally was, authentic and thought through. So.
Absolutely. It's such an important point that, we all need to look in the mirror first, both individually and organizationally, before we can start changing the world outside of us. And my last question is for Rowena and Aiden. You talked about white fragility and introducing that topic first. And I'm just curious as to the reception about that idea and how you responded and overcame any of the discomfort that topic, brought about.
Aiden, you want to take this one first?
Oh, thank you. I think we really saw a range of reactions. I mean, for some, I guess I'll speak to the white folks, but from everything from like defensiveness, denial to, wow, I've never heard of this. This is amazing, and then it really did help get more folks to come along with us on that learning journey. And then I do believe also that it really set up for that panel of local leaders of color, Black leaders, Indigenous leaders who've been doing this work forever, some since they were kids, to really have white folks listen in a different way. And so, but the range of reactions is really interesting. But we've had folks come along with us in this work and continue on that learning journey, and then attend the following year's event with Ijeoma Oluo, and then continue to create change within their organizations, continue their personal work. Rowena, would you like to continue adding to this?
I think you captured it, Aiden. I think the only thing I would add is going back to the point that Aiden had already touched on, was that we have several BIPOC leaders, specifically Black and Indigenous leaders, who have been talking about racism, racist practices, systemic racism forever in the community. And, but it was someone who's white that other white folks can relate to. It was a different messenger. It's not someone who's Black, who's Indigenous, is a person of color, who's making that thing, because people expected that from us, but they didn't expect it from someone who's white. And so the messenger made a difference and allowed us then to bring someone like Ijeoma Oluwa the following year, to hear a different messenger on that same issue.
Sort of prepping your audience to bring them along this journey. That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate everyone's insights on this topic. I just want to give everyone sort of one final chance. Any closing remarks, advice that you would give to either United Way's community partners or local governments who might be in the beginning stages of their racial equity journey?
I have just one, and that is that missteps will happen in this process. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that those are opportunities for us to learn. It doesn't mean that we stop doing it. It's just we need to keep forward because missteps will happen.
Yeah, I'd like to say, like, we look into our local communities and we recognize that this is hard work. It took decades and centuries for us to get here. So it's going to take a minute for us to untangle this. So to Rowena's point, there's going to be missteps, but this is important, in order for us to actually make true structural change. So we have to keep with it.
Great. I think that's a wonderful ending point for today. Thank you again so much for joining us and providing both sort of the United Way worldwide perspective and a more local perspective. Thank you for the work that you're doing to improve race equity in your communities. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to the subject matter. I encourage you to continue to explore our event platform. We have a number of additional workshops that have been pre-recorded, as well as our finalist presentations and cultural entertainment showcases and a lot of fun. So please poke around the event platform, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Bye.